On this episode of Satellite Superheroes, we are talking to a gentleman by the name of Dan Wicks. He is head of geospatial intelligence with a company called Satellite Applications Catapult. And we are demystifying on this episode, demystifying Earth observation. Let's get cracking. Dan, welcome to Satellite Superheroes. How are you doing today?
Hey, Scott. Really well, thank you. And thanks for having me on the podcast.
Oh, yeah, it's pretty cool, man. As you can imagine, we're pretty excited about everything that's around satellites, what's taking place in satellites, where it's going, what the future looks like, how did we get here, and everything in between. And I think that you bring a tremendous amount of knowledge because you've been in it. But one of the areas that is major interest is that demystification. Before we get into that and have that conversation about the demystification of geospatial, all of that stuff, give the listeners a little background on who you are, and then we'll get into that topic.
All right, will do. I am a geographer by background, so study of the Earth and the environment. I've spent my career working as a data scientist, but particularly focused on what we call remote sensing or Earth observation. This is how you take the data that is obtained by satellites and try and do something useful in an applied way with it so that somebody on Earth can use that information to make good decisions.
My conversations with others, it's the technology is rapidly advancing, not just from the physical satellite, right? It's not these big behemoth. They could be micro. There's just many things that can be done, and then deploying the innovation and technology to be able to discover things, map things, whatever it might be, that goes beyond looking at roads and where you grew up at, because that's what I always do from that perspective. Now, you're with Satellite Applications Catapult, and give us a little background on what that company does.
Absolutely. So our mission, and this is pretty cool, is to innovate for a better world empowered by space. So that's a pretty big mission statement. We are a organization that's been set up by the UK government to really try and help the UK economy grow through the benefit of space technology. So we act as an independent innovator in the market, really to help people understand what the technology can do and reap the benefits of it.
There's a lot. I can only imagine the type of conversations you guys have. I think the market in general, there is a necessity for education. There's a necessity to understand space, the implications of space here on Earth, and how that will help us in the future in a big way. So let's talk a little bit about that demystification. For sort of the definition component, let's talk about geospatial. What's that word mean?
Geospatial really refers to any information that has a location element to it. And you can broadly argue that everything happens somewhere, right? All sorts of information tend to have a location element, and that location element provides a kind of common index for that information. So whether it's information about the weather, whether that's information about what's happening in a certain location, you can bring all of that together through that single point in geography to really bring an enhanced understanding of that location.
Do you think we're still at the beginning stages of this, or there's just so much more that can be done within the world of space and satellites?
So I think with Earth observation, it's a technology that's been around for a long time, but it's primarily been in the domain of government and big scientific institutions trying to solve some of the planet's major kind of scientific challenges. And recently, the big change is the fact that as a technology, it's increasingly accessible. Let me put that into context for you. We're talking about satellites today that are taking images of the Earth the size of a loaf of bread. We're putting those into space, and that's in contrast to...
I got to back up. I say that about the loaf of bread again. What is that?
So a satellite with a camera in that's taking pictures of the Earth that is the size of a loaf of bread.
Is that micro satellite that people are talking about?
Yeah, it's what we call a CubeSat. Typically, they come in units of 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters. And then a giant Lego set, you can put as many of them together as you need to house whatever instrumentation or equipment you want to put up into space. So for something with a basic kind of camera in, you're talking about 3 of those bolted together and you're off. And the advantage of that, right, is a lot smaller, weighs a lot less, therefore is a lot cheaper to put into orbit. The launch costs are cheaper because you're typically paying per kilogram for launch. The cost of launch generally is coming down because we've got these brilliant technologies from folks like Elon Musk and the Falcon rockets that are reusable, right? So we're not spending lots of money and not able to reap the benefits of that again and again. And the technology you need to build these things is increasingly off the shelf, right? So the same tech that goes into your mobile phone, we're using to build these things. So suddenly the cost to manufacture them and the cost to put them in space is a lot cheaper. So actually, as a result, one of the big trends we're seeing is huge numbers of these things being launched into space. Maybe 10 years ago, you were talking about 40 launches a year for Earth observation satellites. Now you're talking about upwards of 160 launches a year, and that's just growing. And we use this term mega constellations to describe that trend.
It's a whole new lexicon. And so let me just recap what you just said in my simple mind. Technology's been around, government's been using it. Now, all of a sudden, the technology has advanced so much. Now it's becoming more accessible by us, the market, whatever it might be. And the values of being able to observe from above and be able to see things has increased, and it's available to the market now.
That's right.
Also, costs are being driven down. Technology is because it's shrinking in size, gives us greater scalability, opportunities to be able to leverage this technology going forward. I like it. Did I nail it?
That's exactly it. And as a result, there's lots of private investment interested in the space sector because it's exciting and it's sexy, and that's opening up lots of opportunities. What's great is we've got all of this technology going into space. The challenge becomes, how do you make use of it? How do you put it to work?
Yes.
To really unlock value and solve some of the big problems that we're all facing on the ground. And that's really a big focus of what we do at the Satellite Applications Catapult, is how do you translate that into something that you or I, Joe Bloggs off the street, would be using in their decision making every single day without even knowing it, sometimes.
So let's get into that. Let's talk about, okay, so we're firing these things off. We've got it down to, and they're going to get smaller probably just because that's what happens. And we're just going to be more efficient at sticking them into space, and the technology, the cameras, whatever it might be, will improve. Give us some general use cases that mean something to us as opposed to, hey, I'm looking at this road. There it is.
I guess you could describe the value at a sort of business level and at an individual level. So maybe if we take those kind of one by one. At a business level, one of the biggest topics at the moment, of course, is sustainability and climate, and our ability to monitor the planet's environment and understand the impacts of certain human behaviors and how we can manage those better to achieve positive sustainability outcomes is critical. And Earth observation satellites provide a capability for monitoring at global scale in a way that no other technology can. A really simple example of that would be looking at how we can use nature to address climate crises. You hear a lot about deforestation is bad because you're reducing a carbon sink here on Earth. It negatively impacts our ability to absorb the various greenhouse gas emissions that as humans we're putting out, right? That's an obvious example of where protecting and restoring forests can help with that sequestration of carbon, but it also provides wider benefits to the environment. So, for example, securing and regulating water supplies, or protection from floods, or protection from soil erosion and landslides, all of those sorts of things. Another example might be the way in which we use green infrastructure within city environment. Is there a way in which we can install wildlife on the roofs within cities or on walls within cities? Because that brings benefits in terms of moderating heat, capturing stormwater, abating pollution, all of these sorts of things. And the value that Earth observation brings into that is understanding the optimal way to go about installing these nature-based solutions, but also monitoring them over time to understand the impact that they're having so we can make adjustments accordingly. And that's just one example of where we're trying to tackle a problem by taking a sort of big picture approach.
But it goes, for lack of, that's a pretty sophisticated camera. That's a sophisticated data to be able to track, to understand, to see where there's a need, and that requires information over, do we do you or can we access historical data to determine where we're at today and then begin to move forward tactically to say, nope, right here, because it's all great, but we need to do something, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few points in there. Firstly, yes, we have a huge amount of historic data that we can leverage. So we can look back in time, we can see what's happened, and we can use that to help predict the future by learning from what's come before. So yes, big tick in the box there. And secondly, yes, it is really complicated data. What we're not just talking about here are pictures of the Earth. What we're actually doing is we're measuring emitted or reflected radiation from the Earth's surface. The simple way to explain that would be to say the way that we as humans are able to see things is we can interpret visible wavelengths of light. The reason that my shirt is blue is because it's reflecting blue light more strongly than it is green and red. And we're applying that principle to what we're looking at on the Earth's surface, except the Earth is emitting radiation at much longer wavelengths that we can't see with the human eye. And what we're trying to do is turn that measurement into something useful. So, for example, measuring photosynthetic activity in plants, or measuring the biomass of a tree, for example. These are the sorts of complex data that we can really extract from the satellite imagery. Which brings me on to point 3. You have to have some expertise in being able to interact with that data. But having that data alone is not enough, right? Because you need to bring in wider context. I'm not a conservation expert, but if I want to use Earth observation for conservation, there has to be some sort of collaboration there. So one of the big challenges we face as a space industry is how do we get this complicated data in a format that is less complicated so more people can use it to develop solutions and to innovate and to bring value from it.
Where are we at with that statement? Where are we at? Do we have the algorithms to be able to have that analytic evaluation of the data? Are we there? Can we do it?
Yeah, there's a huge amount of science that we can leverage. And I keep talking about these sort of hundreds of satellites that are being launched. One of the big challenges that comes with that is huge volumes of data. And the good news is that as that progresses on a sort of hockey stick trajectory, we're also seeing developments in parallel technologies like the cloud, high performance computing, the way we use AI as tool sets that we can really bring to bear against that data. There's a big trend towards sort of digital twins of the Earth that people are thinking about at the moment. Can you represent the Earth in a digital form that allows you to understand its ecosystem and the way that it works? So imagine, in order to do that, you need a giant data set that isn't just Earth observation data. It's all sorts of other information that's been collected by humans or sensors on the ground, and you bring all of that together and you leverage some clever AI, and suddenly you're able to do some fantastic things with it in terms of getting insight that you just would never have seen before.
Yeah, that convergence of all those other data points and then coming up and painting that picture of whatever it is, it only benefits us. So one last question on the sort of the business side, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the individual side. From the business perspective, launch a satellite, it has the technology, it's collecting data, it's doing everything that it's. So as a commercial or a business, I can access that data. So business A, B, C, we're all accessing this data that is meaningful to us. Is that how it's just sort of going to roll out? And is that how the business model works?
Yeah, anybody can go and access this data, and some of it's free to access, some of it's commercially available and has a cost attached to it. But as I've already mentioned, there's a level of expertise required to do something with that data. And you also need the sort of compute and the tools to do something with it as well. So there's a sort of cost and skills element attached to that. So one of the challenges we have is, does a business really have the knowledge to know how to go and procure and then get value out of that data? And for the large part, the barriers are too high. There is a growing industry within the space sector of service providers that are experts in accessing this data and translating it into something useful to provide products and services at a much higher level that businesses can access. So that's certainly one way in which that problem space is mediated, if you like. But I think what we want to see is, some of those barriers reduced so that more people can be working, directly with the data.
Yeah, I see one of the things that I think is really important is, I got the data from the sky. It's all great. But to be able to facilitate the convergence of other data to create a meaningful tactical picture of what needs to happen is where the real secret sauce has to occur. And that's a lot of work. That's heavy lifting, baby. That's heavy lifting to be able to do that. And for the most part, you need organizations like yours and others to help navigate those waters, because Scott Sixpack, I want the data. I see the benefit, but I don't even know where to go. And am I leaving things out? And I'm spending money and whatever. There's got to be a way to find some advocacy in that particular area to help business definitely leverage, definitely educate. No, I just think that there's a tremendous opportunity here. Now, let's talk a little bit about individuals. You mentioned business. What do you mean by individuals and the benefits associated with that?
I guess what I mean is the sort of the big vision for this stuff is that Earth observation data becomes a sort of ubiquitous data set that underpins all the decision making that we undertake as individuals every day. And to a degree, some of that happens already. Weather forecasting is heavily dependent on satellite observations. And we've probably all got an app on our phone that we look at every morning to say, do I need to put a jacket on today?
Hey, all of a sudden we're all weather people. Yeah, I did it. We just had a storm come through Louisiana, and you're pulling out that app and you're going, check that out.
Exactly.
I don't know what it means. It's just
what you're looking at is a picture of a cloud or a picture of the sun, right? What you're not seeing is some complex Earth observation imagery. And you probably don't even know that a satellite was used to produce that. But expand that sort of train of thought a little bit to things like buying energy. As when we make choices about who we sign up to provide our energy, do we know where that energy is coming from? Do we know what the most cost-effective options are for us? So, for example, could I install solar panels on my roof? Do I know that they're pointed the right way, that they're going to get a lot of energy? We can look at those things from Earth observation imagery to help you as an individual understand, but then you've got to bring that together with other data sets to provide a sort of coherent picture. You could also extend that to other purchasing decisions. For example, you walk into a supermarket, you're picking up a chocolate bar off the shelf. Do you know that chocolate bar has been sourced in a sustainable way that hasn't resulted in deforestation, for example, or hasn't enabled the slave trade or other sorts of factors? Earth observation is an important data set that can help with that sustainability question. And then I guess a final example to give would be if I go out to exercise outside, whatever it is, there are hundreds of apps, these days that help me with understanding how to plot a route or how to record my activity, or I'm able to look at the weather to know when the right time to go is. Well, another data point that might be useful if you're living in a town or city environment is understanding the pollution level. And again, that's something you can measure with a satellite. So if I'm an asthmatic, actually going out and exercising at a time when the pollution level is at its worst, that's not benefiting anybody, despite the effort that I'm putting in to go and exercise. Wow. So it's these sort of fundamental decisions that we're making every day that could be underpinned by this type of information we're getting off of satellites.
So the pushback and the beef I have is, and this is with data analytics, I always have that, because I think data scientists sit there and they'll just sit there and tweak and divide and do all their data analytics stuff. To what point, right? They'll just, it's like an artist knowing when to step away and say, thumbs up, we're good. I see the same challenge with satellites, because there's so many use cases that can be applied to that technology. My concern is like, hey, we're good. I'm good right now. But it never stops. That motion in the brain is saying, you know what? We could do this. We could do this. Is that a concern? I can't keep up with it. It's pretty cool.
I think it's I think it's an opportunity for sure. There's a huge amount of untapped potential for this stuff. And that comes back to some fundamental blockers around kind of education and the way in which we turn this stuff into a business proposition. Putting a satellite up into space doesn't pay for itself unless there are ways to generate those revenues in the downstream. There's huge opportunities there. How do you tap into them? There is a broader question that you're asking as well around how do you decide when to use this stuff or how good this information really is. And there's definitely a tension, I think, between scientific community striving for perfection with the data analytics piece and actually having information that is just good enough to make a more informed decision than you would have done otherwise. So you're still able to provide value, even if it's not the perfect data set. And I think there's definitely a challenge around how you resolve that sort of tension.
Yeah, it's like a point of diminishing returns. I got it. Let's just stay right there. Don't continue to work on that last 5%. We're good there until you make the next leap in whatever the benefits. And I would imagine there's a significant pushback on, hey, we got land-based stuff that we're right there. We're looking at it. We're right here and having land-based vision and technologies in place. But again, I believe, Scott, it's that convergence and being able to say, okay, we got land-based, we got this, pull it together in a cogent way that makes sense. That's where I think the golden goose is.
That's exactly it. And as a space industry, we can't work in isolation. The AI people or the conservation people or the environmental science people or even the social science people, there has to be a convergence of working to really enable the value of these things.
All right, we're going to have to wrap it up. Great conversation, great information. I'm a smarter person because of this conversation, and I always view myself as I am always the dumbest guy in the conversation, just because I'm talking to great people like you. How do people get a hold of you? And how you're out of the UK? You're part of this organization. Can somebody from the United States give you a call and say, "Hey, I have a question"?
Absolutely. We're based in the UK. We work globally. We have partnerships globally. At the end of the day, one of the values of space technology is it is a cross geography, cross politics technology, and that means working in that way as well. So we're always open to conversations.
And I think you're spot on with the necessity for this technology and what you guys are doing in a collaborative type of mindset, and that is a global approach, right? If you're in space, it's pretty global. How do they get a hold of you?
How do they get a hold of us? Website is sa.catapult.org.uk, and you can also get a hold of us on various social, LinkedIn, Twitter. Good. I'm sure you'll share all of those details for the listeners.
Yeah, I will, and it'll all be out on the podcast, Satellite Superheroes, all the links that are necessary to get in contact with you. So don't come complaining to me that you can't get a hold of Dan. Don't, because it's out there. FYI. You were absolutely spectacular. Love the conversation. The future's bright. I'm pretty bullish on the future, and it's just going to require people like you and others to pull it all together to make it better, because we just need it. We need that information. We do. Thank you, Dan, for joining Satellite Superheroes.
It's a pleasure. It's been good fun. Thanks, Scott.
All right, listeners, we're going to wrap it up on the other side, so stay tuned.
You're listening to the Industrial Talk Podcast Network.
All right, to everyone out there, thank you very much for joining Satellite Superheroes, and as well as thank you to Dan Wicks. He is the head of Geospatial Intelligence, Satellite Applications. Catapult is the company, and I'm just telling you, there are a lot of use cases out there, as he communicated in our emails, of how we can apply satellite technology to make our lives better. From a company's perspective, from an individual's perspective, it is happening today, and it is only getting more and more available. It's just changing lives. We're going to have another great, incredible conversations that are around satellites coming your way, so stay tuned.